Anna Isabel's trembling hands clutched the wooden bench inside the crowded courtroom, her eyes wide as the heavy doors creaked open. A whisper cut through the silence. Some said she was guilty. Others said she was doomed. And at that very moment, as cameras clicked and the judge raised his gavel, a shadow crossed the marble floor, one that would reveal whether innocence could truly stand against wealth, power, and lies. No one could have imagined how far Rodrigo Montenegro, one of the richest and most feared CEOs in São Paulo, would go to destroy the woman who had once dedicated her entire life to saving his fragile children. But the question lingered like a storm about to break. Why would a man with everything wage war against a woman who had nothing? Anna Isabel had always believed her purpose was clear. For years she had lived inside the Montenegro mansion, caring for Lucas and Pedro, the twin boys born with spinal muscular atrophy, a cruel and unforgiving disease that stole their strength day by day. She fed them, lifted them, held their trembling hands when pain became unbearable. She had given up her own family life, her own dreams, to ensure those children never felt abandoned. She wasn't just a nanny. To the boys, she was Tia Ana, a second mother, a source of comfort in their nights filled with machines, alarms, and tears. But to Rodrigo, all her sacrifice could be erased with a single accusation. It began on a cold morning when Rodrigo summoned her to his office. Anna walked in expecting to discuss the twins' medical appointments, or perhaps a new therapy. Instead, she was met with his piercing stare and the icy silence of a man who had already made up his mind. "You've stolen from me," he said flatly. At first, she thought it was a cruel joke. She laughed nervously, asking what he meant, but Rodrigo's face did not soften. He explained that several doses of the boy's medication, the most expensive drug in the world, valued in millions, had disappeared from the locked storage room. And according to him, only one person had full access: Anna Isabel. Her breath caught in her throat. The accusation sliced deeper than any blade. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I would never." But Rodrigo cut her off with the arrogance of a man untouchable by law or morality. "No one will believe you," he murmured, leaning close enough for her to feel the venom in his words. "I am Rodrigo Montenegro. You are just the help." A disposable woman. Those words echoed in her ears long after she left his office, the sting of betrayal crushing her chest. She staggered down the hallway, past the boys' bedroom door, desperate to go inside, to hold them, to tell them she would never hurt them. But the door stayed closed, and Anna knew her life had just been rewritten as a story of crime she had not committed. News spread like wildfire. The press devoured the scandal. Millionaire CEO's nanny accused of stealing life-saving drugs. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Commentators debated her guilt as if it were entertainment. In a matter of hours, Anna was no longer a caregiver, but a villain in the eyes of strangers. She had no lawyer, no money, no family connections. All she had was the truth, and the truth was quickly being buried under the weight of Rodrigo's influence. The first day of trial was a nightmare. Rodrigo entered the courtroom in a tailored black suit, flanked by his attorneys and private security, exuding confidence like a king entering his throne room. People whispered his name with reverence, some even nodding respectfully as he passed. When Anna entered moments later, wearing her plain work clothes, heads turned not with respect, but with judgment. Some sneered, others whispered cruelly. She sat alone, clutching the photo of Lucas and Pedro in her hands, her heart beating like a trapped bird inside her chest. The prosecutor painted her as a scheming woman who had betrayed the trust of a wealthy family for money. He described the stolen medication in gruesome detail, its worth compared to years of an ordinary worker's salary. He pointed at Anna with contempt, declaring that she saw the twins' suffering as a chance to get rich. Anna wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them about the nights she stayed awake monitoring the boy's breathing, the times she cried silently while watching their muscles weaken. But when the judge asked her to speak, her voice cracked and her words were cut short by an objection. "Stick to facts, not emotions," the judge warned, dismissing her pleas. Every eye in the room turned away from her, as if her story was already irrelevant. Then came the so-called evidence. Security footage showed Aina entering the storage room. She knew the footage had no sound, no explanation. She had gone in many times to check the doses, as part of her job. But the prosecutor twisted it, insisting it was the moment she stole the medication. Next came a witness, a former maid who claimed Aina once commented on how much the drug cost. They twisted her words of shock into proof of envy. Finally, Rodrigo himself took the stand. With calculated sorrow, he told the court how he trusted Aina like family, how her betrayal devastated him. "All I ever wanted was to protect my children," he said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. The audience nodded sympathetically. Aina sat frozen, her throat burning. She wanted to shout that he was lying, but even her silence was interpreted as guilt. The weight of despair followed her home that night. In her small apartment, she collapsed against the cold kitchen wall, tears streaming down her face. Headlines on her phone screamed her name in disgrace. Online strangers called her a monster, a thief, a woman without heart. She stared at the photo of the boys on her shelf, remembering when they used to call her Mammy Aina. How could they believe she betrayed them? That thought pierced deeper than any prison cell ever could. She considered giving up, disappearing. But then she whispered to herself in the cracked mirror, "You are not guilty," over and over, until her voice grew steadier. The world could call her a criminal, but she refused to let Lucas and Pedro believe it. For them, she had to keep fighting. The second day of trial was worse. Rodrigo's lawyers presented new evidence, bank statements showing large transfers to an account in Aina's name. She stared in horror. She had never seen those numbers, never opened such an account. "Forgery," she pleaded. "This is not mine." But her protests were drowned out by objections. Then came text messages allegedly between her and black market buyers, discussing prices and pickup dates. Her knees nearly buckled. The words on the screen looked real, with her number, her name, but they were lies. Rodrigo sat back in his chair, adjusting his tie with a smug smile. His plan was working. The court murmured with disgust. To them, the case was closed. Aina was guilty. Her heart pounded as the judge leaned forward, ready to deliver the next blow. And then silence. The courtroom doors opened. Heads turned. Gasps filled the air. There, struggling step by painful step, with the aid of a walker, was Lucas. Beside him, Pedro rolled forward in his motorized wheelchair, determination written across his fragile face. The room froze. Even Rodrigo's confident mask cracked, his mouth tightening in shock. The twins' presence was not planned, not expected. But there they were, crossing the marble floor toward Aina, their eyes locked on her, full of trust, not fear. It was the first sign that perhaps the truth still had a chance to break through. Aina's breath caught as tears filled her eyes. She hadn't known they would come. The sight of them filled her with both pain and hope. Pain, because of what they had endured just to appear in that courtroom. Hope, because their presence spoke louder than all the forged documents in the world. The audience leaned forward in stunned silence. Even the judge paused, his pen hovering above his notepad. Lucas stopped, gripping his walker tightly, his voice trembling as he looked directly at Aina. "She didn't do it," he whispered. The words were small, but they thundered through the silence like a drum. Pedro nodded firmly, his young voice steadier. "Aina would never hurt us. She is the only reason we are alive." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. For the first time, the story Rodrigo had carefully built began to crumble. The courtroom seemed suspended in time after Pedro's words. Even the journalists who had been scribbling furiously in their notepads stopped mid-sentence. Rodrigo shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening, but his lawyers quickly rose to object. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," one of them said, her voice sharp. "These are minors. Their testimony is emotional manipulation." But the judge did not immediately respond. His gaze lingered on the twins, watching Lucas as he struggled to keep his balance, gripping his walker with determination that looked far beyond his fragile years. For the first time since the trial began, Ana Isabel saw doubt flicker in the judge's eyes. That small flicker was enough to give her a thread of hope. Lucas raised his head, his face pale but fierce. "She stayed with us every night," he said, his voice still trembling, but growing steadier with every word. "When we couldn't breathe, she helped us. When the machines beeped, she was there before anyone else. She never left us." His words cut through the lies like light breaking into darkness. Pedro followed, his tone steady and clear. "We know what's happening. We heard things. We know someone else took the medicine, but it wasn't Ana. She is family." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Murmurs rose, louder this time, and for the first time, Ana Isabel saw the press turning their cameras toward Rodrigo, no longer painting him as the grieving father, but as a man under suspicion. Rodrigo's face reddened. He leaned forward, speaking harshly to his attorneys. His mask of calm composure had cracked. He stood abruptly, his booming voice echoing in the chamber. "Enough of this circus. These children don't understand the severity of what's happening. This woman betrayed us. She stole their lives for money, and I will not let her twist this courtroom into a spectacle." His words rang out, but instead of admiration, his fury earned silence. Eyes turned not toward Ana, but toward him. The weight of his arrogance was beginning to show. For the first time, he looked less like a powerful CEO and more like a desperate man trying to control a crumbling story. Ana's heart raced. She wanted to speak, but she held back, knowing the twins' words carried a power hers could not. The judge finally raised his hand for silence. "The children have spoken. Their testimony will be considered." He paused, his eyes narrowing on Rodrigo, studying him as though seeing him for the first time. The lawyers protested again, but the damage was done. The twins had broken the spell of Rodrigo's power over the room. When court adjourned that day, Ana left with her spirit shaken but not shattered. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the world might listen. Outside, journalists swarmed her, microphones thrust in her face. "Ana Isabel, what do you have to say about the twins' testimony? Do you maintain your innocence?" The crowd was overwhelming, but Ana clutched the photo of Lucas and Pedro tightly, raised her chin, and said in a clear voice, "The truth cannot be silenced. I would rather be destroyed than stop fighting for those boys." Her words hit the headlines the next morning, shifting the narrative slightly. Now the public was divided. Was she a monster? Or was she the target of something darker, something powerful enough to manufacture lies? Rodrigo, furious at the turn of events, tightened his grip behind the scenes. His lawyers produced even more evidence, an alleged video of Ana tampering with a safe. Ana's stomach turned when she saw it. The woman in the video looked like her, moved like her, but she knew it wasn't her. It was manipulated footage, edited with precision. Yet the court treated it as real. The prosecutor presented the forged bank records again, hammering the image of a greedy woman. Each blow was designed to erase the boy's testimony, but Ana refused to collapse. Even when the evidence stacked against her, even when whispers of guilt spread again, she repeated her truth silently. "You are not guilty." Late at night, she sat in her tiny apartment, exhaustion carving lines in her face. She had no lawyer willing to fight for her, no resources to prove the evidence was fake. Still, she wrote notes on scraps of paper, building her defense, even though no one listened. She thought about how Rodrigo had built an empire on intimidation, on bending truth until it served him. How many others had been silenced by his wealth? Perhaps she wasn't just fighting for herself or for the boys. Perhaps she was fighting against a man who believed money meant justice. That thought steeled her, turning her fear into resolve. On the final day of trial, tension gripped the courtroom like a storm about to break. Reporters filled every seat, waiting for the sensational conclusion. Rodrigo sat tall, his lawyers confident. Ana sat small, her hands clasped tightly, the photo of the twins hidden beneath them like a secret shield. When the session began, the prosecutor launched into his closing argument, speaking of betrayal, greed, and broken trust. He painted Ana as a heartless woman who turned children's suffering into profit. The words stabbed at her, each syllable pressing against her chest. Then it was her turn. She stood slowly, her knees shaking, but her voice, though fragile, rang clear. "I am not a thief," she said. "I am not a monster. I am a woman who gave everything, my time, my health, my life, to care for two children who mean the world to me. I stayed by their side when no one else did. I wiped their tears. I sang them to sleep. I watched over their breathing when their father was nowhere to be found." The courtroom stirred. She turned to Rodrigo, locking eyes with him for the first time since the trial began. "You say no one will believe me because you are rich, because you are powerful. But truth does not belong to the rich. It belongs to everyone, and I will not let you steal it from me." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "If the court condemns me, so be it. But know this, I would rather lose my freedom than betray Lucas and Pedro. I love them. And that is something no amount of money can erase." Her words left the room in silence. Even the judge seemed taken aback. Then, slowly, murmurs spread through the audience. Some were skeptical, but others looked at Rodrigo, studying him, questioning the cracks in his story. The twins, seated quietly at the back with their caretaker, lifted their voices again. Lucas whispered, "She's telling the truth." Pedro echoed, "We trust her." "We don't trust him." The words pierced through the lies once more, small voices louder than all the wealth in the room. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. He reviewed the evidence, the testimony, the documents. Minutes felt like hours. Ana held her breath, clutching the photo in her hands. Finally, the judge spoke. "The evidence presented raises serious concerns. There are inconsistencies that cannot be ignored. This court cannot, in good conscience, deliver a verdict of guilt without doubt. Therefore, Ana Isabel is acquitted of all charges." Gasps erupted. Some applauded, others protested. Cameras flashed. Ana staggered, tears streaming down her face, hardly believing the words. She was free. Rodrigo erupted in fury. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting at his lawyers. "This is not the end," he bellowed. But his voice, once commanding, now sounded desperate. Reporters swarmed him, asking why his own children had testified against him, asking whether the evidence had been manipulated. For the first time, Rodrigo Montenegro had no answers. His empire of intimidation had cracked in public view. Ana walked out of the courtroom into the sunlight, her chest rising with relief and exhaustion. The twins waited for her at the steps, their fragile bodies small against the crowd, but their smiles radiant. Lucas reached out his hand, trembling, and Ana bent down to hold it. Pedro looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "We told them the truth," he whispered. "We told them who you are." Ana embraced them both, holding them tightly, her heart overflowing. The cameras captured the moment, and the image spread across the country. The nanny accused of stealing life, embraced by the very children she was accused of betraying. In the days that followed, the story shifted. Some continued to doubt her, but others began to question Rodrigo. Journalists investigated the forged evidence, uncovering links to private investigators hired by the Montenegro Empire. Rumors of corruption swirled. The mighty CEO's reputation was no longer untouchable. But Aina did not care about headlines or revenge. What mattered was that Lucas and Pedro knew the truth. They knew she had never abandoned them. She had fought for them, even when the world turned its back. Late one evening, back in her small apartment, Anna sat by the window, the city lights flickering outside. The pain of the trial still clung to her, the scars of humiliation and fear not easily healed. But inside her chest, a quiet strength remained. She whispered to herself the same words she had repeated in the darkest nights. "You are not guilty." This time, the words did not sound like survival. They sounded like victory. For in a world where power and wealth often silence the innocent, Aina Isabel had proven that truth, fragile as it may seem, could still find its voice. And in that truth, she found her freedom.